This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. One of the many ways that Donald Trump is a terrible, terrible leader is the fact that he uses mixed messaging to confuse issues. So he can stand up, or claim to stand on both sides of an issue. Recently, we saw it with his coronavirus response by, in one breath, saying that it's a hoax, that it's just the flu, it'll magically go away like a miracle in a few weeks, but also say that this is very serious. It needs to be taken seriously. More recently, actually prior to that, but we're seeing it again now, was his response to peaceful protesting. He said in a speech in the Rose Garden, while gassing peaceful protesters, he said, "I'm the champion of peaceful protesting." He says, "I'm the champion of peaceful protesting," while vilifying Colin Kaepernick and others who knelt during the national anthem in solidarity against police brutality. Mixed messages. So he can say, he's claimed to be the champion of peaceful protests. He's doing it again. He has claimed to be the biggest fan of the blacks, as he puts it. Look at my African American over there. And he's getting ready to resume his rallies. He's put them on hold, a little hiatus while the coronavirus was going crazy. Now that it's peaking again, we're seeing spikes because states and municipalities all over the country have opened up. We're now seeing the highest numbers they've ever recorded of new infections. Right here where I live in Orange County, California, that's the case. And he's reopening his rallies, going to do them again. And as part of his mixed messaging, he is holding them on June 19th, Juneteenth, which I'm going to get into later, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, while saying he's the best president for black people that this country's ever seen. He's taken a play right out of the dog whistle how-to manual of the Republican Party. First, before I get to what Donald Trump is doing, I want to explain how it is the history of the Republican Party to dog whistle to racists in the South. Ronald Reagan gave a speech on October 3rd, 1980, to kick off his campaign against Jimmy Carter in that election cycle, one that he would win. And he did it at the Neshoba County Fair, the same location where 3 civil rights activists were murdered. He did this speech about 15 or 16 years after their death. Their killer had still not been brought to justice. And he invoked the Southern strategy. It was the final leg of putting the nail in the coffin of the switch from gathering Democratic voters in what were called Dixiecrats and turning them into Republicans. The switch was finally complete in about 1980. I'm going to read a couple lines from the speech. I know that in speaking to this crowd that I'm speaking to what has to be about 90% Democrat. I just meant by party affiliation. I didn't mean how you feel. I was a Democrat most of my life. I believe in states' rights. I believe that we've distorted the balance of our government today by giving powers that were never intended in the Constitution to that federal establishment. This is a dog whistle. States' rights. The same justification, the same term used to justify Jim Crow in the South. Segregation, abuse, oppression of the system of white America, in law, in canon, to discriminate and oppress black Americans. On June 14th, 2004, William Raspberry wrote this in the Washington Post about that particular speech. It was bitter symbolism for Black Americans, though surely not just for Black Americans. Countless observers have noted that Reagan took the Republican Party from virtual irrelevance to the ascendancy it now enjoys. The essence of that transformation, we shouldn't forget, is the party's successful wooing of the race-exploiting Southern Democrats formerly known as Dixiecrats. And Reagan's Philadelphia, Mississippi, appearance was an important bouquet in that courtship. The quote-unquote states' rights reference was just one of many racist dog whistles Reagan employed throughout his political career. During his unsuccessful 1976 run for the Republican presidential nomination, Reagan decried welfare queens and a quote-unquote strapping young buck who bought T-bone steaks with food stamps. In his 1984 re-election campaign, he even returned to Philadelphia and declared that, quote-unquote, the South shall rise again. Yeah. So he chose that spot for a reason. Because he wanted to signal, to dog whistle, to racist whites all across the South, I'm with you. I believe in the things that you believe in. States' rights, Jim Crow, oppression of blacks is also important to me. It wasn't a coincidence. And he stood on ground where 3 civil rights activists were murdered. Their killer had still not been prosecuted. The state and local government protected the murderer. The community protected the murderer. And it wasn't until 2005, 41 years later, that this gem, this KKK leader, Edgar Ray Killen, was convicted for their murders and sentenced to 60 years. And it took that long because the community protected him. The state government protected him. Racists protected him. And now here we are today, 2020, and Donald Trump is taking a play directly out of this playbook. He's giving his inaugural post-coronavirus speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You may have heard of Black Wall Street. On June 19th. Now, Juneteenth, if you've not heard of it, is a day when, June 19th, 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, that the Emancipation Proclamation was read to free slaves in Texas. Because Texas was so remote and there wasn't enough Union soldiers dispatched down there, they couldn't enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. And that was the day that finally the slaves were freed in Texas. The defiant racists in Texas. So it's become a day of celebration. Now, not only is Donald Trump holding his Tulsa rally on Juneteenth, he's doing it in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was the site of, in the Greenwood district, of race riots, where hundreds of black citizens were murdered by a white mob of rioters and looters, where 10,000 black Americans were rendered homeless because the entire community was burned down. So vicious was this attack that they were flying planes. This is 1921. 1921. They were flying planes dropping firebombs onto businesses and homes. The National Guard had to be called in because they were killing everyone, destroying everything. And it was sparked because a shoe shiner named Dick Rowland was accused by a white girl, a 19-year-old kid was accused by a 17-year-old girl that he had assaulted her in an elevator. A newspaper wrote a ridiculous, vicious, racist headline, and it whipped these white idiots into a frenzy. Where have we heard stories like this before? Yeah, all throughout American history, we've heard stories like this before. Whipped these white idiots into a frenzy, they went nuts, invaded this very successful standalone black community, murdering, rioting, looting, burning, devastating the community. Linda Christensen wrote for the Zen Education Project, the term race riot does not adequately describe the events of May 31st to June 1st, 1921 in Greenwood, a black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In fact, the term itself, race riot, implies that both blacks and whites might be equally to blame for the lawlessness and violence. The historical record documents a sustained and murderous assault on black lives and property. This assault was met by a brave but unsuccessful armed defense of their community by some black World War I veterans and others. During the night and day of the riot, deputized whites killed more than 300 African Americans. They looted and burned to the ground 40 square blocks of 1,265 African American homes, including hospitals, schools, and churches, and destroyed 150 businesses. White deputies and members of the National Guard arrested and detained 6,000 black Tulsans who were only released upon being vouched for by a white employer or other white citizen. 9,000 African Americans were left homeless and lived in tents well into the winter of 1921. Mixed messages. Donald Trump wants to be the friend to the black voter. I've done more for blacks in this country than any other president in the history of our country. And yet, don't think this is a mistake. Don't think this is a coincidence. He's choosing Juneteenth, June 19th, 2020, almost 100 years after the massacre in Tulsa. Those two things conjoining aren't a mistake. They're not a coincidence. He's doing this on purpose to send, just like Ronald Reagan did, a signal that I'm with you, white people. I'm with you against black people. Because these racist assholes think that blacks in our country have had it too good for too long. And they want to check them. They want to put their thumb on them. And with the help of some conservative idiots like Candace Owens and others, they are, they're doing their damnedest. I don't think they're making much headway. But it is important to understand, not just for black Americans, but for everyone who lives here, that we have, this is an insidious choice to take a page out of this, like the Southern strategy. It was successful. It worked, but it's over. You don't need to do this anymore. And Donald Trump is desperate because he is plummeting in the polls. His support among Americans all across the board, of every economic stripe, of every racial stripe, is declining. We've watched what he has done with his coronavirus response. We've watched what he's done with regard to the uprising we're seeing against police brutality. We know what side he's on. Anyway, I just didn't want the week to go without talking about this. I may talk about it again once it happens, but this is important. I've done videos on the Southern strategy specifically, and I'll put those in the information in the description down below. Check it out. It is important to understand the history of our country and the history of the Republican Party, because it once was a proud party that led the movement to free enslaved Americans all over the country. There was a switch. You'll see in the comments, people are like, the Democrats are the party of the KKK. That is true. That used to be the case. Democrats used to be the party of the KKK. That's no longer the way it is anymore because the parties switched. The Republicans using a dog whistling message of, listen, just watch the video on Southern strategy if you don't. I play audio of campaign strategists talking about it. It's a proven thing. It's not a myth. As Candace Owens has testified before Congress saying that was a myth. It's insane that anyone would have the audacity to deny it because it is not a conspiracy theory. It is fact. It is history. It is documented. Anyway, I would love to know what you think. 714-576-4054. Daily at Dollemore.com. I love you guys. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for engaging with my content. If you're in a position and I bring you value, I would appreciate you just considering becoming a channel member. Click the join button down below. It'll give you the details. For fewer than $2 a month, you can become a channel member. Help support independent media. Like I always say, though, if I'm not your flavor, and I'm not for everybody, support a creator out there, an independent media voice that does bring you value. It is important right now that we lend some support to voices that aren't corporate-owned, corporate-motivated, sponsored voices. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Again, I love you guys. Be genuine. Take care of one another.